I've got a terrific photograph of some elephants, and there was a baby at the base, which was a bit obscure. So I'm doing what I always do. I fold the photograph into four, and then I divide my canvas or my paper into four, and I draw quarter by quarter by quarter. That way I get it fairly accurate. I'm working on canvas. I'm using a Derwent watercolor pencil, and it's very easy to rub out. If you make any mistakes whatsoever, you just lift it off with a bit of water and a kitchen towel. And that little baby is taken from a different photograph, and I've superimposed it onto my photo. He looks a bit like a Dumbo type baby elephant, but he is actually an elephant that's out there playing. We were recently in South Africa on safari, and my husband took these photos, and I've adjusted them. I've tried to create a nice composition, and I'm going to paint them. I'm painting with watercolor on canvas, and it's quite an unusual technique insofar as everyone here in the UK likes to work with watercolor paper, but I don't get on with watercolor paper. I find it fights you, and it dries too quickly, and it absorbs, and it creates blotches, and frankly I just don't like it. So I like working on on a canvas. I'm putting a texture paste on. This is the Daler-Rowney texture paste. I'm using a painting knife. That's a knife that's got a neck. The reason for the paste is to create some lovely texture, which once it's dry, the watercolor will run into. So I'm scratching into the trunk to try and create those crevices, and putting it on fairly thick, and just, having a little play. And I think this is the big thing about texture paste. You've got to find your way of working with it, but I must say I do love working with it. Putting it on, scratching it off, turning, moving it, trying to get the effect of the ears flapping. And it takes about 20 minutes to half an hour to dry. It must be bone dry before you work on it, because it is water soluble. So if you work on it while it's still wet, it's a good view of the back of my head, it will run into the paint. Now I'm putting a little into the background, scraping it out and putting it on. It's really great fun to work with. When, do buy some and have a go, and creates all sorts of exciting textures that just help to enhance the painting. I'm scratching in with an embossing tool and with my fingers, let it dry. Once the texture paste is completely dry, I'm going to get the watercolor to run down the canvas, and I'm using primary colors. I'm wetting the surface of the elephant with water, and then I'm using this is a sword brush, so I like to work with red, yellow and blue. And I'm first wetting the elephant's ears, dropping a bit of purple on it, and then of course when you add yellow you're going to get some delicious colour mixing. It's going to basically turn out grey-brown, but instead of being a pre-mixed colour, you're getting some lovely wet into wet effects. And it's the way I like to paint. I do like to be very experimental. So red, yellow and blue is giving me the grey that I'm after, but you've got little hints of blue in places, you've got little hints of purple in places, and it's all running into that texture paste and creating some gorgeous shapes that, very difficult to create with just a brush alone. The sword brush carries an enormous amount of water, and it's got a lovely point. It's also got a flat side to it, so it's one of my favourite brushes to work with. I'm leaving a little bit of a dry gap between the elephant's head and the ear on the left. And dropped a little red into it, so I'm getting a browny colour. I've decided to paint a little flatter than I had it, a bit more control. But you can see it's a wet surface, and I'm painting across the the canvas and just allowing the colours all to run into each other. But as they run, you do need to go back and add a bit more colour to them. Now I'm wetting the body, but once again there'll be quite a dry patch around the ear so that the ear doesn't run into the body. Changing to, that's a burnt sienna by the looks of it, and just dropping the colour on. Of course, with watercolour, you always have the problem that it dries a lot lighter than the colour that you started off with. So when it's wet, it looks nice and dark. But of course, when you've got it nice and dry, it's 2 or 3 tones lighter. So you do have to be quite experimental and just get in there. It's a good view of my hair. There we go. Allowing all the colours to blend together. Please note that little bit of dry patch around the ears, which is stopping the ears from running into the body. Very traditional thing to do with watercolour is have little dry flecks of your surface showing. Right, that elephant's almost dry. He must carry on. Bit of a dry patch between these two elephants, otherwise they'll run together. Picking up some blue and a little bit of red, creating a grey. But touches of the colours all blend into each other, so it's not a pre-mixed colour. It's very much a colour that's going to happen on the page, which is just the way I like to paint, frankly. Can you see the results of having texture paste on the ears? You're getting these lovely nooks and crannies and crevices that are just happening. It wasn't planned, it's just happening. I'm going to let all that dry while I move on to the big elephant. You have to wet the surface first to allow the paint to run into the crevices. So I'm working ear by ear, and then I'll bring some water down and then start adding colour to it. So you do re-wet the surface and start working. It's very much a wet into wet technique. So allowing all the colours to run, taking it as dark as I possibly can. Controlling the brush. I'm using a wash brush, but it does carry a lot of paint and a lot of water, so you do need a paper towel in your hands the whole time just to control the amount of water. Just popping in a little bit of dark here and there. I love the way the colours find their own level, and I'm just going back to darken in places as the paint on the left dries and just adding a little bit more to it here and there. Always work from a black and white photograph, and the reason for that is so that I can add my own colours. I'm working with primary colours, I'm wetting the surface. It's a lot lighter now, so I'll possibly go into yellows. Good girl. A little bit of yellow here and there. That's yellow ochre. A little bit of light red. I do like light red. I don't know why they call it light red. It's brick brown, but hey. Gives you some beautiful neutral tones. Ultramarine favourite blue. Mixing a lot with the ultramarine. Painting behind the baby. I'm now tilting that canvas again just to get that paint to move down the page. I tend to work flat, and that gives me a lot of control. If I was working on an easel, all the paint would be running. So I'm working flat, and then I tilt it as and when I need it to tilt. Painting around the little baby elephant. I've moved across to the main elephant, and just watch what happens when I put the dark paint down the trunk. It's absolutely beautiful. It runs into all the crevices that are made with the texture paste and gives you that lovely trunk shape. I actually walked with some elephants, wild elephants, while I was in South Africa. What an experience. Fabulous. Possibly my favorite animal to paint, actually. Beautiful. They are enormous. I cannot describe how big they are. You know, you've got one lumbering behind you, 5 tons coming down. You tend to keep moving very quickly. But lovely experience. Right, what am I doing? Fiddling. Getting back into those ears. I just want the light to be a good contrast against the dark. So because I'm working on canvas, it's taking a long time to dry, and I can lift off and I can add to it, and I don't get any of those cauliflowers or strange and bizarre things that happen with watercolor. I'm using a burnt umber watercolor pencil there just to add a bit of detail, and going straight in on top of that texture paste, dropping the eyes in, outlining the tusk. I can lift off. So I made a mistake and I've just lifted off. It's lovely. The fact that it's on canvas, completely controllable. Right, am I going to have a go at the baby? Well, no, I'm going to have a go at some eyes, put a few details in. The paint on the left is dried off quite a bit now. So using that burnt umber, I can go back in and just put a bit of detail in. I see I've just sharpened my pencil. You must all think I paint very quickly, but of course this is a voiceover, and I do paint a lot slower than this, but I'm condensing it, and I have Jordan who is editing for me, and he's done a terrific job, and it looks like I paint like mad very quickly, but I do take my time. And then we speed it up just so that it makes it more accessible for everyone. The legs on the right. Okay, go with it. Looks like they're in a bit of cloud, a little bit of mist, so taking it quite dark. Using the blue, the red. Oh, made a mistake lifting off, painted over the tusk, so just a bit of a lift off. And of course, as soon as it's dry, you can go back in and add more colour to it. So that is the beauty of working on a canvas. Bit more detail at the back. So you'll be painting everywhere. Good luck. I'm now starting to paint the baby. Right. This is going to be interesting. Right. Now, darks and lights, lights and darks. Made a mistake already. Lifting it off. Doesn't matter. Lovely sword brush. Beautiful thing to work with. Very controllable. Carries a lot of paint. It doesn't run dry. You can see I'm not dipping into paint that much. Using a wash brush just to put a big wash of colour down. And then that's a rigger. So the whole painting is done with just 3 brushes. And of course the watercolour pencil. I have a lot of brushes, but I must say these 3 are the ones that I seem to work the most with. But you need brushes for acrylic, you need brushes for oils. But for watercolour, you've got to find the brush that works for you. And it's got to carry a lot of paint, and it's got to come to a tip. So it's quite demanding. Right, that's a rigger. I'm lifting off the colour from the top of the elephant so that there's a contrast between the baby elephant and the elephant behind it. So just wetting the ear on the left, dropping that in. Quite light. This baby's going to be a lot lighter than the elephants behind it. But in spite of that, you do need to give it a bit of form. There we go, doing his trunk. He's charging forward, so his legs are in some very strange position, but hopefully it doesn't look too much like Dumbo. He is very Dumbo-esque. There we are, very thick little legs. They like to chase birds, baby elephants. They've got a thing about chasing birds, so they're always taking off and flapping their ears at birds. And the parents always lumbering after them. We saw a lot of elephant while in South Africa. Very lucky. We actually saw the big five, so that was the rhinos and the water buffalo, a couple of lions, and we also saw some cheetahs, so that was lovely. We saw some rhinos that were fighting, bashing their heads together. That was very dramatic. And we went in September, which is a good time to go because the foliage is quite bare and you can actually see the elephants. So if you are planning a trip to South Africa, I recommend September. It's spring, it's quite cool. Can get very, very hot, of course. I'm using the burnt umber here. So I usually work with ultramarine blue pencil, watercolor pencil, or umber. And between the two, we get the job done. And just redrawing around the baby elephant and sketching in. My cat has come to join me, so we might have some conversation from her. She's very talkative. She's a Burmese. She does like to help me. Painting the leg that's coming forward. It does look quite bizarre, but it is the way it is in the photograph. So that's what I'm painting. Right, putting the dark in of the foot pad. It's tilted, quite tricky, but let it all dry. Now, I'm going to use a Derwent spritzer and just spritz all the way around the background, and a big brush. This is a Hake. It's a Ron Ronson Hake, and it's a beautiful brush. It's a oriental brush, carries a lot of paint, covers a huge territory, and I'm just dropping the paint in quite randomly because I'm putting these elephants in the bush, charging towards the water hole, and using the big brush to lay the paint in, and then using smaller brushes to move the paint around, and using a paper towel just to lift off. So a very freestyle way of painting. I don't want a solid background. I want the background to be quite exciting to look at. And I just love the way watercolor runs. It all runs into each other, banging the back of the brush, getting it all to splash. Right, painting the sky once again, just dropping a bit of blue into the background just to break the white. No other reason. Just to soften those edges around there, give it quite a cloudy effect. Of course, all this dries, so you can layer some more on top of it once it is dry. But I've worked all the way with just yellows, blues and reds, bit of texture paste, 2 or 3 brushes, and it's all done on canvas, watercolor on canvas. Adding a bit more dark here and there. And just making sure the outside edges are interesting to look at. Catching any drips. Letting it dry a little. Picking up any drips. When it's bone dry, I'll have another look at it. Might add a few more details to it. And then when it's bone dry, I'll spray it twice with picture varnish. A spray varnish matte, not shiny. And that will seal it and make it waterproof. And then it's ready to hang on the wall or go on exhibition. Just want to darken behind the baby elephant so that he shows up a little bit better. And I can do that because the paint is dry and I can move it around. So, thank you for watching.